I want to tell you tonight about a guy that had a huge impact on me during my fellows year, and his name was Stephen Johnson. A lot of you here from the area, you know Stephen. Stephen had the unfortunate responsibility of becoming my mentor for the year. Okay, I think most of you have mentors. Now, there were a lot of reasons Stephen should not have wanted to meet with me. The least of which being was every time we got together, I smelled awful. No, I really smelled awful. And the reason was that Stephen and I realized that we were both so busy, the only time that we could actually get together was on Sunday nights. And if you're a fellow at Falls Church, you know that that's the time when we get together with the youth group. So every time I came together with Stephen, I just come from a room full of 100 sweaty, sugar-crazed, nuts middle schoolers, okay? And so you know what I smell like if you've worked with middle school children. I did not smell like a Bath & Body Works store, okay? I reeked. And I get there, and faithfully every week, Stephen would open the door. He'd give me this great big hug in the midst of my funk. And he'd smile, and he'd pour me a glass of water. And we'd go down into his basement, and we'd sit, and we'd talk, and we'd pray. And it was my time with Stephen that year that just shattered the category that I had in my mind at that point in my life of what it meant to serve God in the workplace. Now, why was that? Because as I sat across from Stephen week after week, I realized I was sitting across from one of the most mature Christian men I'd ever met. And if you know Stephen, you know that's true. I mean, he had this amazing devotional life. He knew the Bible in and out. He had a sense of how he wanted to serve God in his work. And yet here was the kicker. Stephen wasn't a pastor. Stephen didn't work for InterVarsity. He wasn't a missionary. Stephen wasn't what we would call, some of us, full-time Christian ministry, or maybe better, set-apart gospel ministry. Stephen had what I thought was really a secular job. And the truth is, I didn't really have a category in my mind for the Stephen Johnsons of the world. I did have a category of what I thought true Christian work was, but the Stephen Johnsons just didn't fit into it. And we should probably ask ourselves, if you're in a situation like that, how did I get there? How did I get that impression at this point in my life? And I think one of the ways that I got there was, maybe some of you can relate to this, I was the kind of token ministry guy coming into the program. And that wasn't because I was actually any good at it. It's just because growing up, I wasn't really good at anything else, and people had to welcome me to ministry stuff, and so I just kind of got involved. And all my friends were involved with ministry. We were involved with our youth group. We led Young Life together in college. We were super involved with our campus fellowships. And we bought into, and we even perpetuated this dangerous idea that if you're really sold out for Christ, if you're really sold out, when you graduate, you'll go into full-time Christian ministry. So if you're familiar with Young Life, you'll go on staff, or you'll go to work with Crew, or maybe you'll go overseas and work with YWAM. Or if you're boring, maybe you'll become a pastor. And that's what I chose to do. And I was looking at these things, and I was interested in all of them, but one of the reasons was because I thought as a Christian, they were my only options. They were going to be the only way that I could make a dent in the kingdom. But I realized I was wrong. As I sat across from Stephen, I knew I'm wrong. And I got this sense over the course of this year that you can be a God-honoring, God-glorifying person serving him in all sorts of different professions, like he was as a lawyer or as an architect or as a teacher, all sorts of different things, and that these things had equal value in God's economy. You could make just as big a contribution to the kingdom. Now, in fact, I did end up later going into ministry, but I went, and by that, of course, you know what I mean, set-apart gospel ministry. I went not because it was my only option as a Christian, but because I felt called. And now, on Sundays, when I think about those times I had with Stephen years ago on Sundays, when I look out on the congregation that I serve in Northwest DC, I don't mentally divide the room into the kind of super Christians like my boss or myself who actually do serve God with our work, and then looking out at the second tier, second-rate Christians that went into secular work. I look out and I see a room full of different people serving God in all sorts of different ways. I see the body of Christ, the saints, the holy ones, making their equal contribution in all sorts of different ways. And one of my hopes and my prayers for you all this year is that you've got a much more broad, wider sense of Christian vocation. And as I close, I want to address a group of you who are in here. I know there's at least a small handful of you, and there's something that I really want you to know, and I want to actually talk to you in kind of two groups. One, the group I want to address is those of you who come from kind of the token ministry background. And you know who you are. You're involved with these things too. And you've been told, similarly as I was growing up, that if you really want to have impact for God, if you're really sold out, you too will go into full-time Christian ministry. But this year's done something huge in you. And you've realized that's not your only option. And that you can do other things. And now you've actually become curious about other things. You're thinking maybe about going into the film industry. Or maybe being involved in public service. Or maybe creating that startup that you always have been dreaming about. And I want to tell you, if that's you, if that's your background and yet you have these new interests, I want to tell you, press into those things. Don't feel guilty for pursuing those things. Go step into that line of work, glorify God in it, sense his delight in you as you do it, and then become a leader in those things. And then grab alongside you other young Christians who are also trying to get a sense of how they can serve God in that field. Do that, and don't feel any guilt about it. But I want to address another group of you as well, too. And those are those of you in here who also have been thinking about being involved in Christian ministry. You come from a background, and yet this year you've gotten a much more broader, comprehensive sense of vocation. And yet you still have that kind of set-apart gospel ministry itch. You love teaching the Bible. You love counseling. But you're wondering, if you choose to go into those things, is it going to be a cop-out? You know, are you selling out? Or are you betraying this thing that you've been entrusted with this year, this vision? And I want to tell you, you're not. Don't feel guilty. And we were standing there in worship, and I was looking out at this room, and I was thinking, we need another generation of pastors and evangelists and missionaries and youth ministers and Christian counselors and worship leaders. We need you. So don't feel guilty. If that's you, press into it. And so for all of you, as you continue to pray and you think about these next couple months and the next couple years and your next step, I want you to keep my story in mind, my journey to becoming a pastor. But don't just keep me in mind. Keep the scores of other Christians in mind who are serving God in all sorts of different vocations. And also keep the Stephen Johnsons in mind as well. And then, as the Lord leads you, go become one. Thank you.